what specific types of analysis are you doing to say, yes, we're going to do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, not something else?
You'll be surprised, but it's a lot of a vibe check, actually.
It's the okay.
There's a lot of vibe going on it, obviously.
Hello, and welcome to Behind the Game, the podcast where we talk to experts in the gaming industry. Sponsored by Yoda One. My name is Sandy, and I'm joined with my wonderful co-host Luke. Today, we are talking to Jules Hirtzig. He is a senior business developer at Dotemu. Dotemu is a French video game developer and publisher specializing in modern releases of retro games. Jules, welcome. I always kind of like to start with the question, how did you find yourself in the gaming industry in this certain position?
Well, for me, it's pretty straightforward. I was at university, and basically, I was just doing back then. I was doing a license in sales, pretty general license, and you find yourself at a crossroad at one point when you went through 3 years of studies, and suddenly you're like, all right, I'm going to have my license. What I'm going to do with my life now? Where I am going? Because obviously you have a lot of idea about what kind of work you could do, but then it's just not about only the work, but also about the industry. So at that time, I was kind of being led into going into the wine industry, strongly recommended by my father.
I feel that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not the wine industry, but being recommended by parents. Yeah, tough.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was kind of a way I was going to, following an internship in New Zealand. So I was supposed to attend one of the big business school in Bordeaux, obviously, because I'm based in France. So obviously, the big wine school based in Bordeaux, and I had this realization, like, all right, I like wine, but do I want to make a living out of selling wine for all my life? And I was like, no. So I did kind of a 180. The kind of disappointed my father at the time because I had the path set and clear, and I was going basically into uncharted territory, especially when you hear all the story about going to work into the video game industry, when it's always like it's very ruthless, it's very hard to get through. Very little people actually manage to get in. So I did want to follow some producing studies in Cannes, which is better known for the movie industry, but it happened that there was a couple of video game formation there. So I did 2 years there for producing.
Did you have to convince him that it was a real job?
Yeah.
Well, still then I was still unsure if I was going to land a real job, because doing studies is one thing, but landing a job afterward, it's a whole entire
right?
thing.
Yep.
Exactly. I actually managed to land an internship after a lot of difficulty at Nacon, which probably know for their WOC game and such, which is also a French company. And I landed a position there as an intern into the licensing department. So basically, all I was doing all day long was, entering brand to basically be in our games and review cars that are going to be features in WRC and such. So it was a very good first step into the video game industry. And from then, I did 9 months, and I got an opportunity actually to work potentially as a salesman at Dotemu back then. So it was a very new thing because Dotemu didn't have a sales department. So we basically were trying to build one from the ground up. And well, lucky me, I actually did some studies in sales, and licensing was actually very close to sales, because you were operating on a budget to get all this brand into a game.
I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about when you're looking for an IP to work with, when you're thinking about what game to focus on next. Are you thinking about nostalgia, and then how are you thinking about, if this is the right IP to work with?
A good thing with nostalgia is that it's something that is universal to everybody. And the one thing interesting, obviously, at the company is that we have several different generations of people. So we kind of have, a different milestone into where the nostalgia tapped in. And there's some license that actually, kind of managed to be transgenerational in that regard. when no matter the generation, there's something that tap in. I think the best example would be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle that we work on, because basically that's a license that's been out there for a long time, and no matter the generation, it seems that everybody grew up with at least one iteration of the Turtles. So that's something that everybody can relate, and so that's kind of a thing that we're looking into when we're working on license and what to pick, what to work on, because obviously that's the thing. We're still in the video game industry, so there's cost investment time whenever you work on license. If you work on license, you can't work on other, because obviously we have resources and we can't allocate all these resources to every single license out there. So we need to be picky on our choice and what will be the best one. And basically, the idea is what's going to be the broader audience we can touch with this license, and also not necessarily in terms of age, but also territory, because that's another thing with TMNT is that it's a license that you will think that because it's US based, it's mostly popular in the US, but turns out that it's something that actually cross border and was actually
Sure. Yeah.
very, very
That's
well known all across the world.
absolutely. Yeah. So again, looking through the lens of this being a business decision, right? What are you looking at to make to evaluate that? It's not just vibes, right? You said you have the cross generation team, but what specific types of analysis are you doing to say yes, we're going to do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, not something else?
You'll be surprised, but it's a lot of a vibe check, actually.
Okay.
There's a lot of vibe going on it, obviously. But I mean, that's the thing with a license like that. You can have a good idea just looking at it, and I mean, obviously, the longest the story the license has, the better you have the idea that it will perform well. I mean, you don't have a license that's brought across 20 years of iteration if it's not actually working.
Right. That makes sense. Do you have any, tips or tricks on ways to bring, I guess, old nostalgic games? I know we're talking about like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but that's an IP, so like a movie IP, not a game IP. But do you have any like experience or any tips you could give me on how to bring a game IP back?
Yes, actually, I think we have a very good case that because we did a remaster for Pharaoh with Pharaoh New Era, which is a game that also go way back. That was initially developed by Sierra Games. So actually a very funny one because it took us a lot of digging to actually find where the game disappeared. Because Sierra Games obviously have been purchased and repurchased by a company. And we found out that the game landed at Activision. It did make sense for us to bring that because Pharaoh is like the godfather of city building. There's been a before and after Pharaoh when it comes to what people define as city building games nowadays. And so we knew there was a big market regarding that game. We knew that there was people that are very reminiscent around that game. So the idea is how do we tap into that existing players base that play the game about like 20 to 30 years ago while also opening up to a new generation of gamer. That's always the conundrum and of doing new with the old. That's one trap that many people do when they think about bringing back old games or old IPs is to do strictly like it was. And the thing is, people have evolved. People have evolved, and there's some quality of life that wasn't possible to do back in the days that we can actually do nowadays. So it's not only a matter of just make the game prettier. There's also going to be an expectation regarding the gameplay, but you can't also go overboard with it. Else,
because then it's not the same game.
It's a completely different game, and people will be alienated about that. So it's very difficult. It's kind of a double-edged sword whenever you tap into an old IP and try to remake it because you need to find a good balance.
Yeah, you need to like the same game that has the same nostalgic feeling, but upgraded in, 2024 style. I'm curious on how you guys handle the monetization aspect.
Well, that's the thing. We don't, because that's one thing that we do at the company. So we just do premium-based game to begin with. So there's not that issue of having to derive the business model of what it used to be. back then they weren't sold digitally; they were sold in box. So that's also one thing that we're very insistent whenever we do this kind of release. We always insist of doing physical release because we know that the true collector people that play with this game way back, that's the format they had, and they also want to have the same. They want to have a physical edition of their games. So that's something that we're
Interesting.
always obliged to do.
I gave you guys $3.99 last night because I saw that you had a game called I Have No Mouth and I Need to Scream. And
Yes.
it blew my mind because in our previous podcast episode, we were talking with a game designer who just randomly brought up this game, this very old game, and it was that game. And then I saw that you guys were working on this and had published it on mobile, so I downloaded it and tried it, and it's crazy. And I was pleasantly surprised to see, okay, an interesting premium game that has a story that's not asking me to buy stuff. This is interesting. No in-app purchases. Huh.
Yeah, that's actually go back to the very root and early days of Dotemu because obviously Dotemu we've been in business for over 17 years. So back then it was way before I even joined in. The idea was still very focused into the retro gaming. The idea was get all these old games and just bring them back to modern sports. So that was the idea. It was all these games that weren't published anymore, that were kind of abandonware in a sense, bring them back to PC, mobile, sometimes even consoles. And yeah, I Have No Math and I Must Scream was one of these games that we touched upon and did a mobile pop pack in the days. And we did that with several games. Actually, this was the first step that allowed us to actually get some recognition and trust from IP holders.
Oh,
Um,
your cat has changed colors.
yeah, I have two. This is the
Yeah.
chunky one. When you're talking about giving out, or like selling these hard copies, so they used to be available on Nintendo 64, PlayStation 2, and so you redo them for like the new PlayStation 5. Is it the new Xbox? Blah blah blah. And also, where do you sell? Like, where do you sell them out to? Do you sell them online? Do you sell them to Best Buy? To GameStop? Like, where do you sell the hard copies to?
When it comes to the hard copies, we're very lucky to have very good partners that we've been working across the years. And one core strategy that we have is that we work locally for each territory with partner. So we can always ensure that no matter where you live on the world, you'll be able to get a copy because we're partnering with in Japan, in Asia Pacific, in Europe, in the US, and every single of these partners can allow us to cover all the territories. That also mean a lot more work for us because we're producing 4 different physical versions right. across the board. But that's allowed us to actually touch upon the territory sensibility of each territory and make something a bit more personal and more welcome to each given territory in that sense.
Right. Sounds like a lot of localization and even
a
culturalization.
Lot of localization.
Right. Culturalization is also a big part. Of course, localization, changing the text into the right language and everything like that. But there's also little things that you can do within the game to make it more cultural specific, and then you just have a higher retention, all that good stuff. So do you guys do any culturalization too, or do you just mainly stick to like changing the text?
Culturalization is a bit more tricky because obviously we're operating on IPs and with IP holders obviously right. that have a strict idea of how everything needs to be represented. So we can't really take much liberty or we're going to address and represent the game. Obviously there's some fringe cases that when you need to do culturalization, I think the only sole exception will be really the Chinese market, which per its nature of or to release a game in an official fashion, they do require to go from Sunuk to culturalize the game to the government standards. So that will be the only case when we will be doing changes to the IPs with right. obviously the acceptance of the IP holders because they do know that you do need to assess to standard to get there.
I have a question about working with IP holders. So let's say that I'm a Steam developer, and I look at you guys and what you're doing, and I say, well, that's an interesting example. They're really tapping into the power of IPs. I want to do that as a developer for PC games. What are some of the things that you can say about how to make sure that your effort is not wasted, fully maximizing, leveraging that IP to actually, make a game that's going to be successful? And also, is there anything that you guys have learned working with IP holders that can make communication more efficient or easier that you've kind of learned over time?
Well, first thing, it's always to play on your strengths. So I will be looking at my track records, what game I have pushed into market before that, because that's what the IP holders are going to look. I don't know all IP, obviously IP holders operate in different formats. Sometimes they just want to to push the IP out there as much as possible. I know that some do, and they don't really care about what game, what genre of game, what quality of game go out there as long as there's the IP on it. But I usually have a good tracking record about the kind of game you want to do. Is go a long way to actually secure an IP to begin with, because obviously you have a genre that you're strong on, and then the idea is, all right, I have that. Can I slap an IP on that? And if so, which one? And from there, just build a case to what the IP owners, get in touch with them, and from there it's pretty straightforward. It's going to be a yes or no.
When you're actually working with them, you talked about limitations, you talked about their guidelines, uh, things you can't do, maybe culturalization or localization that you may not be able to do. Um, is there any other things that you guys have learned over time about working with an IP holder that just to make it more an easier process?
Communication, it's key, and that's one thing that we try to do as much as possible, is to keep the IP owners updated as much as possible on where the game is going, almost on a weekly basis, because one thing can derive the development of a game greatly if something got unnoticed that actually might bother the IP owner. And we had this issue, so in some production, when something went unnoticed for quite a long time, and suddenly it's become an issue to the IP owner, and we have to backtrack, and we can lose several weeks of work just about that. So communication is very important if you don't want to get into these pitfalls that can alter greatly development, because that's also one thing with IP owners is most of the time they do have an idea of when they want you to release the game. So you can negotiate around that. You can push back, obviously, but you have to keep in mind that if you work with an IP owner, except if you work with a whole licensed game or anything like that, if you work really with an IP such as TMNT, which is a cross-media IP, they have most definitely other projects in the pipeline, and each thing that's releasing, no matter if it's a video game or a movie. For instance, when we did TMNT, there was also the movie in preparation, so there was also that in the timeline of Nickelodeon. We have these beats that we want to meet, and so we can just build upon each other when it comes to increase brand awareness. I think that's one thing that IP owners always have in mind outside of ensuring that the game is successful and making money. We also want them to be an extension of a brand.
Yeah, that
Right.
makes sense.
In my experience, working with IP holders can be very, I don't want to say finicky, but they just like their things in a very particular way. Like it could be as simple as not having a light behind the main character, or not you know having this character caged, or like there's so many interesting rules when it comes to each different IP. um I don't know how you guys do it, to be honest. I've only done a couple IP collabs, and they stress me out immensely. So kudos and congrats, and hats off to you guys.
We have a very good production and marketing team that are always very astute when it comes to answering the VIP owner we work with. We do know that they can be really difficult when it comes to marketing and validating all the marketing assets. So one thing we usually do is once we have a couple of marketing assets validated, we're like, all right, we're going to recycle those as much as we can because we know that they're approved and we can work on those.
Like the game is usually at that point already approved, so that's
a great suggestion. I mean, you want to limit the scope of how much you have to get approved and reuse as much as you can once it is.
I mean, you still
Oh,
have to get it
exactly.
approved.
Yeah.
And like they might come, like I had this one time, like we used in-game footage, like it was like a screenshot from in the game, and they were like, "Nope, can't use that." We were like, "It's in the game," but we went back and we showed them specifically where in the game we took a picture of it, and they were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I get, that's fine." But
Yeah, how good it go with an IP feels from time to time that it really depends of your point of contacts at one company. Because even for one game, we can go through different contacts, and the relationship is completely different from one person to another. So there's always a bit of luck involved on the process, whether it's going to be easy or hard road to go through.
and of course, it depends on the IP holder itself. Like some are more picky than others. Like some of them, just like Japan's IPs, they hold them really close to themselves, So they're a little bit more picky than like maybe some more Western IP holders.
Yeah, we do know about working with Japan. From my understanding, I know that Street of Rage went pretty smooth when it comes to validation in all the process to begin with, because it was a dormant IP at Sega, so they didn't have, a lot of. They were very happy from the game just being brought back. So there was not much an issue, but obviously we did work with other IP owners and also working with current IP owners, and sometimes it can be a bit more difficult because, like you said, they can be a bit conservative about your approach and how they want things to be represented, and it's a different culture as well. So you also need to uh, level with them and sometimes push back. Sometimes you can't just accept that. Sometimes you need to push back with caution.
I have maybe a slightly more technical question. So, could you talk a little bit about any differences in structure from a limited time IP event as opposed to an IP based game?
I think it's pretty similar, to be honest. Usually, what we do deal with MG payment, even sometimes flat fee payment, depending on the size of the IP, and there's also an expected royalties that go with it as well. So I don't know if it's something that also you have to deal with when it comes to royalty payment, but that's something that does get involved a lot.
Is there a general average time frame that you guys have for recouping the minimum guarantee? Is there anything you could say about that, or is that getting uh, too much into stuff you can't say? I'm trying to put on that developer's hat, thinking, okay, this is an investment, right? In a way, and I want to know when that will happen. How fast is it going to be?
So it can go pretty fast. I think that recouping the game actually can even happen before the release of the game, depending of the amount of, because obviously I'm the salesman at my company, so I'm doing also a lot of deals with MG involved from the beginning. So there's a good chance that the game is already profitable. We already recouped the investment even before the release of the game. So that's what one of my things that I do at Dotemu. Other than that, usually if the game is a success, the MG could be recouped within a month from the release. To be honest.
Okay, so that's a decent benchmark, I guess, that someone could set if it's well executed. I'm wondering about basic trends that you see. I mean, this is, as you say, something that you guys have been doing for a long time. But as a trend in the industry, IP is kind of really growing. It's really becoming maybe largely because of Fortnite paving the way, but it's now, I think, starting to be seen as a major way for IP holders to reach new audiences and maintain the durability of their IPs, but also as a game developer, a way to reach, obviously, whole new audiences, whether it's an IP-based game or an IP collaboration. I wonder what you see coming up in the next few years as things to look out for, things to be excited about, dangers to maybe watch out for.
I mean, obviously, watch out for us because we kind of a spearhead of that movement when it comes to
Yeah.
IP-based games. So, and I think one of the interesting things is that the switch in the industry regarding IP-based video game, because for the longest time I remember way back when I was a teenager, whenever you had an IP-based video game, usually it was not that good.
Yeah.
I think that's something that has been seen across the world when it comes to IP-based game. Obviously, they don't have all the same level of quality, but that they're becoming better and better in that regard. Uh, and I think we kind of kill that reputation of if you do a game based on an IP, it has to be bad because you don't have to put effort in it. Because I think that was the inner thinking about why doing an IP based game is that you have an IP, so why bother make something good? Obviously, I'm not saying that all IP based game nowadays are all good, but there's been the switch in the mentality that it's not because you have an IP that you don't have to go the extra miles to actually make it a very good game. And I think that we're going to see more of that in the future when we're going to have more and more quality games that don't just bet in everything on the IP, but also want to deliver something that even if you didn't have the IP attached to the game, it will be a great game to begin with.
All right, Jules, thank you so much for being here. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very
I
much.
always like to leave our guests with one last question. We call it the cheat code question. So
Whoa.
basically, if you could go back in time and give yourself a cheat code to get to where you are now to further your career along, what would your cheat code be?
Don't listen to your father.
Okay, yeah.
Just kidding. Love my father, but obviously when you're young, you feel a lot of peer pressure coming to your adult because you got the impression that I mean, obviously they do know better, but sometimes it pays to take off a beaten path, and fail. Even if you fail, failing is part of the learning.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Yeah, again, well, thank you so much for being here. It was super fun and super interesting. We really hope you enjoyed it. If you did like this episode, please check out all of our others. We are available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. We will see you in the next one. Bye.